been looking a lot closer at the betting odds, the future bets, right? Not partaking too much. Looking at the future odds on FanDuel right now, our friends at FanDuel, for Georgia's games over the next year, right? They've only got a few of them on there, 4 of them, right? Because Georgia's got big games and they only have big games that you could bet on right now. But there are betting lines and there are future bets. You can look at Carson Beck's Heisman odds. You can look at Georgia's national championship odds. You can look at a handful of games. You can look at like odds to make the playoffs versus not make the playoffs. How much, you can kind of do the math. If I bet $10 on this, that whatever. Georgia's odds tell the whole story about how everyone feels about them heading into this year. And I'm looking at the most recent rankings. Things have changed. Things didn't change before, right? From January to outside of the transfer portal, there weren't really changes on these rosters, these teams, developments over the course of a couple months. And the pro days happen, blah, blah, blah. Then the springs happen, and you see the spring games, and you see all the quarterback battles. You see how people look. Odds tweak a little bit. Georgia's odds didn't tweak that much. Some others did. But the Dogs are viewed as the best team. According to Vegas, according to the experts that predict these things, Georgia is seen as the best team. Not Ohio State, not Texas, not Oregon, not Bama, not Ole Miss, not whoever else is up there at the top, Missouri, Penn State, whoever. It's Georgia, and it's not close. Let's look at all these odds because they're interesting to me. You can look at win totals, conference winners, right? You look at the SEC. Georgia plus 185 compared to Texas plus 310, Ole Miss plus 650. It drops off. You look at the Big Ten. Oregon and Ohio State, there's not as much separation there. Does that speak a little bit more about Oregon? Does it speak a little bit more about Georgia or Ohio State? We'll see. You look at the win totals. Georgia, the win totals is not a great one because no one's going to get over 11. Like, they're all going to be 10.5. If we're looking at a team that's supposed to maybe win 12 games, it'll be a 10.5. So you look at Georgia's odds, it's over under 10.5 wins. That's the line that you'd have to bet on. You look at a Texas, it's the same thing. So that's not something that tells you the story as much. It's these. Heisman, right? We talked about this a little bit. I'm not going to hit on this for the longest time. It's interesting to me. I don't agree with a little bit of it. But Quinn Ewers and Carson Beck tied with plus 750 odds to win the Heisman Trophy this coming year. I would bump up Jalen Milroe. You ask me personally, I think he's going to be better. I don't know that Alabama's going to be better, but I think he's going to be better. Will Howard? No, I think he could be really good for Ohio State. I think that Ohio State can compete for a national championship. I would predict at this point he would win that job, but Heisman seems lofty. C.J. Stroud and Justin Fields did not win the Heisman with that situation. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Years vary. It varies from years to years. C.J. Stroud had to go up against Caleb Williams and Bryce Young for that award. Will Howard go up against someone with those numbers and that talent? I don't know. If it's Carson Beck, I don't think he'd have those kind of numbers, even though he's going to be the best quarterback in college football. And then you look at the national championship odds. Georgia plus 300, Ohio State plus 450, Texas plus 700, Oregon plus 850. So this is the beginning, right? I've been slowly getting us to this point. This is the beginning of my point here. Georgia, think about this. Georgia plus 300, Ohio State plus 450. You see that gap there. And then you see the gap plus 700 for Texas, plus 850 for Oregon. Viewing Texas higher than Oregon. The consensus, it seems, when you look at these odds. And then you look at the games. You look at individual game odds. And you can see some of these big games. I already discussed Georgia-Clemson, that minus 12.5 schedule. Or how I thought that was not high enough. I think that Georgia's going to win by more than 2 touchdowns and maybe by 4. Georgia minus 3.5 over Bama, right? Kind of move on. We'll get back to that later. Here's where the beginning of that is. They viewed Texas higher than Oregon with those betting odds, the 700 to 900 range. Ohio State, not the favorite against Oregon. They've got Oregon as minus 1.5. That's going to be October 5th, 12? Oh, those times aren't set. Maybe not 12, but October 5th, Ohio State will travel to Oregon. They will play the Ducks in Autzen. And the Ducks are 1.5 point favorites. Dylan Gabriel And Evan Stewart's going to be their new duo with Troy Franklin and Bo Nix now in the NFL. It'll be very interesting. I think that Dan Lanning's doing a good job. I trust Dan Lanning as a coach. I think that Oregon could win the Big Ten for sure. This is going to be a tough game for Ohio State. Ohio State does have a better team on paper, right? On paper, a term that we've used for this over and over. But I just think it's interesting. So Oregon, a favorite over Ohio State, even though we'll get to this. A week later, Georgia goes to Texas. And Georgia's a favorite over Texas, 1.5-point favorite over the Longhorns. At Texas, Ohio State was not favored at Oregon. What's a tougher environment? Probably Texas. I don't know. Haven't been to either of them. Excited to go and see the Texas environment. I can't speak on it from a personal experience, from everything that I know about football and college football. I think, I don't know why my voice was so high for that, but I think that Texas would be a tougher environment to play in. And Georgia's favored. So it kind of tells you right there, all of these numbers point Georgia. Put your money on the Dogs. That's what it's saying. Over another top 10 team, Georgia minus 5.5. When's the last time Georgia was not favored? Is that... Do you think I could Google that real quick? I'm literally going to Google that. When was the last time UGA football was the underdog? Oh, I think it was the Clemson game. 2 years ago. Yeah, I believe that the last time Georgia was an underdog was the Clemson game in 2021. If I'm getting that right off of the top of my head, I think that Clemson was like a 3-point favorite in that game. I have to know. 2021 betting odds. Yeah, Clemson minus... Yeah, so Clemson was a favorite in that game. 3-point favorite. I was right. Let's go. Pulled that from the dome. So it's been years since Georgia has been... Like, I was on the phone with my mom today. We were talking. She was asking me, you know how it is with the parent. Oh, how's this season going to be? And I was just telling her, look, I think that Georgia's the best team in the country. And I said, but I would have also said that every single day for the last 4 years, for the last 4 seasons, if you're including this season and those 4. I would have said that every single day, even when Georgia wasn't in the college football playoff a few months ago and Michigan was winning the national championship. I still thought that about the Georgia Bulldogs. It doesn't change. It seems like Vegas is standing pat on that. Hey, look at this. We think Georgia's going to do this and this and this and this. The Heisman, the national championship, these individual games, the conference betting odds, all of it points to Georgia is the best, which leads me to kind of the end of this point, which is that Georgia... It's switched. I've kind of said it. I think a lot of us have said it. But the transition of who the power is in college football has officially been handed over to the Georgia Bulldogs. Now the inherent, hey, they're the one every single year, no matter how good they are. And having a returning quarterback is always going to help that conversation big time in the sport like this where it's that important. But we are at the point where now the default is that Georgia is this. Georgia is number one. Georgia... It's hard to say dynasty because they need more rings, in my opinion, to be considered a real dynasty and for us to look back at these years and these glory years as a dynasty. This is as close as you get to it without having that official title. And then, people's rules for what a dynasty are different. I think 3, this year, they get it. I think you have to call it a dynasty. But my point with that is they're teetering with that term. Oh, man, I can't believe that we got that, I had the do not disturb on and it went off. My apologies there. But the dynasty, they're teetering with that word. And Reese Davis told me back in November, before the Ole Miss game, the day before Friday, I got to have a conversation with him. He told me that what they're doing is building an unprecedented dynasty. And this is not the beginning of it. Kirby Smart's been doing this since 2016, but what it's become is a monster. It's a beast. It's a machine that every single year you're going to get a situation like this where Georgia's odds, if they keep winning the way that they are, they're always going to be the favorite. Almost always going to be the favorite, if not one of them. Enjoy the glory days of the Georgia Bulldogs because that's what Vegas thinks about them.